Do you think ADHD is taken seriously?
The first thing that people go to is everyone's over self-diagnosing and everyone thinks that they've got ADHD. We need to look at what the real problems are in terms of lack of access to support, to diagnosis, to medication, to therapy. You have a lot of imposter syndrome. You've spent your whole life being gaslit. You find it's not too loud, it's not too bright, you're being too sensitive. You can do it, you're just being lazy. You're going to think, oh, am I actually right in my judgment? Because every other judgment I've made for the past 24 years has been wrong.
One of the ladies that wrote in your book said that self-diagnosis saved her life. Our next guest is a brilliant example of what can happen when the penny drops and you grab it with both hands. Ellie's story from misdiagnosed, unemployed school dropout to autistic ADHD, author, TEDx talker, flag bearer for her 300,000 strong neurodivergent community is an absolute inspiration. And she's done it in just 2 years. Let's get into it. Let's see how great minds think differently. Ellie, thank you so much for coming on the Hidden 20%.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming down south. I know it's not that far. We were in touch before you'd published your book, and now you've published your book. Congrats.
Thank you.
I've read it. I think it's brilliant. And I wanted to just start by just picking out a few things, a few choice sort of phrases, and maybe if you can help listeners, watchers, etc., understand, because I think there's some mega important stuff. First one was the lost generation. I just loved the phrasing and wondered if you could, given that we're both part of that lost generation, and I'm sure many people listening and watching are also part of that lost generation, maybe you could just outline what that is.
Yeah, so kind of the idea that like there's all of these conversations happening at the moment, especially in the media, of like everyone's getting diagnosed with ADHD nowadays and everyone thinks they're autistic and all this stuff. And it's like trying to explain the fact that actually, no, these people that are getting diagnosed later in life have always been autistic, have always had ADHD. They just slipped through the net, weren't diagnosed when they should have been as children. So now it's kind of like, that lost generation of people who are now hopefully starting to find answers and get those diagnoses. And it's like, there's no wonder that we've got all of these people to catch up on because we were missed initially rather than it just like magically appearing out of nowhere.
Let's just take autism and ADHD, for example, because we're both those things. When did they start being diagnosed? Like, why is it now we've got these mega, like, 10-year waiting lists that you hear? When did that all start? And why is it all now, like, suddenly a complete roadblock?
Yeah, so ADHD, I find this so interesting, couldn't be diagnosed in adults until 2008. Yeah. So it's like literally only, under 20 years that you've actually been able to get a diagnosis as an adult.
Do you know what was it before then?
I think it could be, they thought that it kind of, you got to 18 and surprise, I can do things now, I can remember things.
You're an adult.
Yeah, you're an adult now, so you don't have that childish thing. Yeah. But I think it's kind of the combination of that, of them not understanding that it was something that was a lifelong, the way that your brain worked, but also just, the fact that the diagnostic criteria aren't set up to account for most people's experiences. So right from the very start with both autism and ADHD, the people that were getting seen by the psychiatrists who were doing the research to make the criteria it was kind of like middle-class white families who had a naughty little boy that they didn't know what to do with. So they would take this naughty little boy to the psychiatrist. So the research was basically all done on young, white, middle-class boys. So that sort of started off the cycle of them thinking that was the only people that could be autistic or ADHD. And then fewer research kind of went outside of that area. So it's kind of this like self-perpetuating cycle of like, we think that it's only young, cis, white, middle-class boys. So they're the only people that get diagnosed. So that kind of ties into that. But then there is also so many of people that were young white boys that were missed too. So kind of doesn't make much sense. Right. But I think it's kind of that of the diagnostic criteria just hasn't accounted for so many people's experiences. One example that I use in the book is like on the autism, like the pre-screening tests that you would do to even get referred to a specialist. It's like, I collect information about categories of things: birds, cars, trains, and planes. And yeah, I was like reading that when I was kind of first like looking into whether I thought I could be autistic, and I was like, well, that doesn't really sound like me. Like, I don't think I do that. And then I was like, actually, that's because I'm not an 8-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Like, I do collect information about categories of things. I become really obsessed. I've never just liked anything in my life. I'm not interested, or it is my whole personality trait. Yep. But because the question is designed in a way that doesn't account for that, and we're all very literal thinkers as well. So I'm like, well, no, I don't collect information about birds, cars, trains, or planes.
Therefore.
So that doesn't relate to me. So you're sort of like discounting yourself and also being discounted from that, when it's actually that box should have had a tick from me, because I do display that behavior just in a slightly different way.
How do you think all of that is now changing or shifting?
Yeah, I think for me it's social media. So if I was like reading that question on the NHS website, I'm like, no, it doesn't really sound like me. But then if I open TikTok and I see a 20-something-year-old woman who's quite similar to me talking about, here's how I experience obsessions or special interests or hyperfixations or whatever it is, and she's talking about the fact that she loves certain bands and listens to them over and over again, or she loves certain creators and she watches all their videos, and I'm like, oh yeah, that is me. So then it's like I resonate with that experience, so I'm more likely to understand that is something that I do experience, rather than being like, no, it doesn't sound like me. So I think for me, that's it's like this access to other people's lived experience, I think, which is almost like this ripple effect of people see somebody else that's similar to them, that is autistic, that is ADHD, that has that assigned to them, and they're like, oh, well, that person's kind of like me, so maybe that's something that I could be as well, rather than this sort of impersonal black and white list of traits that's only kind of designed to account for like young boys, isn't going to resonate with that many people.
From a social media perspective, where does that then trip us up and go wrong and become dangerous?
Yeah, I think this is really like interesting conversation, because it's like the first thing that people go to is like, everyone's over self-diagnosing and everyone thinks that they've got ADHD, and we don't want to like take away the legitimacy. It's like, these are all really valid concerns. But I think the way that I see it is like, the worst thing, so let's take ADHD, for example. The worst thing that happens if somebody incorrectly self-diagnoses is they buy a few more planners. They are a bit kinder to themselves. They might work a bit more flexibly. If they're self-diagnosing, they can't access medication, so it's not like dangerous that they may be taking the wrong medication. They can't really access any support in terms of like benefits, or, it's not like a financial risk to the country. They're just going to be a bit kinder to themselves and work in ways that's more suited to them. The worst thing that happens if somebody goes undiagnosed their whole life is, well, the stats around ADHD are like awful in terms of like prison rates, suicide rates, mental health rates, financial kind of risk, like really awful consequences of going undiagnosed for a long time. And I'm like, well, I'd much rather take the fact that people are buying too many planners than the risk of people going undiagnosed. And I think that's what's tricky about that conversation, is because people kind of naturally jump to that, oh, we don't want to take away the like legitimacy. And it's like, is that the worst thing though? Because like, for me, it's worse that people are going unsupported, like undiagnosed, like unhealthy, unhappy. So I think, it's obviously we don't want it to take away from how disabling it is. We don't want it to become like a throwaway comment. People are like, oh, I'm a bit OCD because they like things to be tidy.
Yes.
But for me, I'd rather take that risk, I think, and I think most people, the vast majority of people that are self-diagnosing, aren't just watching one video about forgetfulness and going, oh yeah, I think I must have ADHD now. They're watching that one video and then going on to watch 100 other videos, and then going and doing the online like assessments, and then talking to other people, and then, literally obsessing over it, and then coming to the conclusion of like, oh yeah, that does sound like me.
But it makes, I mean, you kind of looking outside in, and you're like, well, if someone told you might have to wait 10 years for a diagnosis, or you might have to pay hundreds, maybe even thousands of pounds, then you're kind of like, what are my options there?
Yeah.
I can't afford a private diagnosis. My GP is a plonker or doesn't listen, or I don't want to be on a waiting list. I am in need now.
Yeah.
So where I can gravitate to the internet and I'm going to sort of figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like, we need to look at what the real problems are in terms of lack of access to support, to diagnosis, to medication, to therapy, to all of these things, rather than, the dangerous internet. It's like, no, it's filling a gap of the support that you can't get from other places.
One of the ladies that wrote in your book said that self-diagnosis saved her life, and you're kind of like, I can believe it.
Yeah.
And I can believe it against the infrastructure and conditions that are now we find ourselves in, of just access to support, diagnosis, etc.
Yeah, I think it's like just over 2 years since my ADHD diagnosis, and I was really lucky and really privileged to be able to go private for that diagnosis. But if I hadn't have been able to afford that, whatever it was, £500 at that time, which is the case for a lot of people and more people as we're going through this cost of living crisis, I probably wouldn't still have a diagnosis now. Like, I would not be sitting here doing this. I would still have been on an NHS waiting list, really struggling with anxiety and depression and low mood and all of this other stuff. Because the only reason that I'm not in that position is that I had £500 of disposable money that I could afford to put towards that thing. And that should never be the case, that basically access to £500 could be the difference between my whole life being completely different. So it's like, well, a lot of people don't have that. So what are they supposed to do?
Yes. My personal view is that, it's not all about people getting diagnosed, but hearing you and my experience is like diagnosis was the key. It's like I was handed the keys.
Yeah.
And I'll go and find the lock and I'll go and open the door and all the rest of it. But somebody handing me those keys, that was everything.
Yeah.
You called it a light bulb moment. It's, it really feels like that. And so I don't know how I'll ask you, how do we speed up that diagnostic process, assessments and access?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky one as well, because it's like, at the moment, you get a diagnosis and that's, see you later. There you go. Yeah. We've given you this life-changing piece of information. Good luck. Which is obviously not great. But then you can't get through a waiting list of people without rushing them through quickly. So it's like, where do you find that balance between giving people proper support and pre and post diagnosis care, but also getting through this waiting list of people that really need to be seen? So I mean, it's like a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
But I think because of that, it just means that we're going to have to accept self-diagnosis a lot more, and give people the tools to be able to accurately self-diagnose, because there's no way that we can sort of magically get 10 years worth of appointments through the system. So I think like peer support is really important, like communities where people can and talk to people, and sort of explore that self-diagnosis, because I think it is something that you have a lot of imposter syndrome about as well, because you've spent your whole life being gaslit, basically, of like, no, that's wrong that you're tired about this.
You're not.
You're not. You're fine. It's not too loud. It's not too bright. You're being too sensitive. You can do it. You're just being lazy. So it's like, there's no wonder that then you're going to think, oh, am I actually right in my judgment? Because every other judgment I've made for the past 24 years has been wrong. So I think it is, you do need people around you to sort of confirm that almost. It's like peer reviewed diagnosis. So I think, peer support is really important, and providing people with the tools to come to that conclusion, but then also to support themselves. I think that's something that I want to really focus on, is like, you get that diagnosis and then there's no sort of, this might help you, this is support you can access, like access to work, you can access, like, it's like up to 60 grand a year you can get in government support but no one tells you that. No one knows about it. So no one's accessing it. And it's like, if there was just sort of a toolkit at the point of like, okay, we're really sorry, like we should be able to offer you therapy, care, whatever. We can't do that right now, but here are some things that might help, would at least be like a step in the right direction.
Do you think ADHD is taken seriously?
No, not at all. I think the medication shortage has like highlighted that like 1,000,000% of like, you know, thousands of people are going without a medication that they need on a daily basis to be able to work, live, regulate their emotions, and we've just run out, sorry, like,
and you need a diagnosis
to be able to get that medication,
to get the medication.
I just think if it was a physical disability, would we be in a position where we'd even got to the point of running out? Probably not, because it would have been like, we can't possibly make people go without this medication. So I think they would have sort of stepped in before it got to the point of the shortage, but also at least provided some sort of communication or alternatives. In the research that they did, I think it was like only 15% of people found that their GP had actually followed the guidelines and contacted them about the shortage. So like 85% of people hadn't had a proper conversation with their GP who's like, your medication is on like low supply, you might not be able to get it, this is how long it's going to be, this is what you should do, you know, should I keep taking it every day, should I ration it, should I like wean myself off it? Nobody's even had that, which I just think shows that it's like, you'll be fine, it's only a bit of
you'll be a bit more hyper, just don't worry about it.
Yeah, whereas like not understanding of like, no, that like my life is so different on and off medication.
What's the journey you've been on with medication and ADHD?
Yeah, so when I first got diagnosed, I was kind of like, I didn't go into the diagnostic process thinking that I would go on medication. It was very much more for like understanding, validation, whatever. And I was kind of like, I'm not really interested in, I think I had really, I was very reluctant to go on medication because of the experience that I'd had with antidepressants. Mm-hmm. I was put on antidepressants at 15. By 17, I was on like the maximum dosage that a fully grown adult man can be on, which is, you know, clearly not great to happen, and I couldn't get out of bed and all of this stuff. So for me, I was very much like, I don't want to be back on medication. And then I had a friend that was going through the ADHD diagnosis process at the same time. And she was kind of in the same place. And she was like, I've been looking on Reddit and everyone kind of says that it is really helpful. And she's like, I just feel like it would be silly for me to have gone to all of this effort to get the diagnosis to not even give it a go. And I was like, actually, you kind of like, that makes sense what you're saying there. I was like, I think I might give it a go. Like, if I don't like it, I can not take it, but at least I know this way.
What did you believe the medication was going to do?
I think I wasn't really sure. I think when I'd looked online, it was people sort of saying that they could just think about one thing at a time, which
okay. Yeah.
I was like, that's fake news. I think as well, because like the only other sort of similar experience I'd had was antidepressants, mm-hmm. and that's not almost like a tangible difference. It's just like kind of gradually over time, things feel less intense, I guess. So yeah, I think I didn't really know what to expect, but I took it at like, 8 a.m. And then within half an hour, I was on the phone to my mum crying of like, I can just like, my brain is quiet. I can like think,
wow,
this is just amazing. I don't know. Like, I was like, my brain is just quiet. I can just remember this. Like, I think I probably don't, like, I'm used to it now, but I can remember the first thing of being like, almost like feeling like I was in like an echoey room of like, oh, is this like what this people room? Have, yeah. I'm like, is this what people have been having their whole lives of like, it was like the first silence, almost like, you know, when you like turn the extractor fan off after you've been cooking and you're like, it was like that inside my brain.
Noise.
Yeah. But then very strangely, that was also the day that I posted my LinkedIn post, which was like the first post that went viral, which is like kind of what kickstarted all of this. So it's like I had 30 minutes of silence, and then it was like I've not had a quiet moment since. But yeah, so I kind of been on the same medication since then. I went up a bit in dosage, and then I've come back down a bit in dosage since I've been self-employed, because I kind of found, I think it's really tricky as an autistic ADHD as well, because when I'm on medication, it is amazing in terms of I can do things, basically. Like, I can get started, I can sit and work, rather than I feel like when I'm not on medication, it's like dragging huge weights on my feet to do anything. Everything's just hard, whereas the medication makes it just easier to do things. But I also can't rest if I've taken my medication, because it is this like, I'm almost like insatiable for like stimulation and work, and like I need to be doing something. I'm like a capitalism machine when I'm on medication. Like I need to be achieving something, I need to be working, I need to be doing something. So as an autistic person, that's not ideal, because I need to rest. So I've kind of got to a place now where I'll take it like 3 or 4 days a week, and then over the weekend I won't take it, so I can actually like switch off. But I think it's a very personal choice. I think a lot of people choose to go without medication. I think maybe if I was like in like different places in life as well. Like I think when I go on holiday, for example, I probably will only take it like every few days, just to make sure that I'm not then just like, I don't know, going cold turkey. But it's not, if I was traveling, for example, I think at that point I probably wouldn't be on medication at that time, because I don't need to be able to like work in the same way. But I think definitely for like productivity, I can't imagine not having it and having to do anything of any value.
You kind of said obviously everything went crazy. You put the LinkedIn post out. Being autistic and ADHD and seeing what has happened to you in like just the being catapulted into the media, partnerships, social, just being an author. I know you'll be such a massive inspiration to people. Tell me how this last year has felt for you, not what you've done, because I've given people a sense of that, but just tell me how it's felt.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one, because it is like balancing that like immense like gratitude and just like disbelief almost of like what the actual heck is going on. Like my life could not be any more different. Like 3 years ago I dropped out of school, so I don't have A-levels, had to decline my uni offers because my mental health was just, I could not have left home at the time. Never had a job for more than a year, was like constantly in this cycle of just having awful mental health, just like convinced I wasn't going to go anywhere in life, because how could I, when every 6 months I had this like awful anxiety and depression, to now like I've done a TED talk, I've written a book, like I'm doing all these amazing things. Like it is sort of that combination of, immense gratitude. But it sometimes is so tricky to feel that, because I get so burnt out, which makes my emotions just impossible to regulate, and so tired. And it's like almost this like constantly like swinging pendulum of like, I'm like, this is the best thing in the world, and I'm like, I can't do this for another day, like I need to stop right now. I think it's tricky to find that sweet spot where it's like, if I don't talk about the hard times, then I'm doing the opposite of what I've set out to do. I'm talking about, let's unmask, let's be ourselves, let's like do things our way. If I'm then just being like, I achieved this and I achieved this and I achieved this, then that's not doing that. And it's sort of pushing this false narrative. Like the way that I live is not a healthy way for an autistic person to live. Like it's not normal for me to be doing the amount of stuff that I'm doing, and I do pay the consequences. Whereas if other people are seeing that I'm just doing all that and not seeing the other side, then they're like, well, I should be able to do that, and I should be able to do more things. And so it's like, I definitely don't want to have that. But then also, I don't want it to be all doom and gloom and me crying on my stories. And like, also I shouldn't have to prove my struggles for them to be accepted. And I think sometimes it feels like, people are like, oh, but you're so like high functioning, and you must have mild, or like all of this just like massively incorrect stuff that is so problematic.
Let's just bash those down though now for people listening and watching. High functioning as a term.
Yeah, no.
What do you think about that?
Awful, horrendous. I think basically high functioning means able to perform under capitalism. What you mean is I'm able to work, I'm able to earn money, and I'm able to live on my own. That's what you mean by high functioning. I'm able to do things, earn money, live alone.
Which basically means I'm able to earn money and spend the money.
Yeah. I think support needs, like high support needs and low support needs labels, are not perfect, but they're the closest thing that we've got.
Yeah, I've not heard those.
That's kind of what I see people like lean towards of like, so I would say that I'm like a relatively low support needs, which is kind of objectively true that I do have lower support needs than people who are maybe nonverbal. But even that almost like it can fluctuate. Like my support needs change. If I'm having a really tough time, I will have to go home because I need someone to, or I won't shower for 5 days. I need someone to remind me to eat and shower and do all of those.
But the support needs need context, right? Of when you do need a lot of support, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Who's involved? How much does it cost?
Yeah.
We as a society like to we like grading people.
Yeah.
You know, of like, where do we put them? It's just sort of not helpful. Can you be mildly autistic?
You cannot be mildly autistic. I think
Can you be mildly ADHD?
You cannot be mildly ADHD. I think like people think of the autistic spectrum especially as like a line from a little bit autistic to incredibly autistic, and it's like that's just not the case. It's a circle, and it's like different experiences, and those things like change over time. And I think in a way it's used in people who are lower support needs and higher masking. I think sometimes there can be kind of like, oh yeah, I'm autistic, but I'm not like those autistic people. And it's like, no, you are. We're all the same. Like, yes, those people have higher support needs. They might have more difficulties. They might be disabled in more ways, but they're not lesser than you. I think a lot of people who are very high masking and very low support needs are getting diagnosed later in life because they've been able to kind of have the like mask and have these coping strategies to be able to go under the radar for such a long time. But that means that they've kind of grown up in this ableist society that we all live in, where it is kind of like, oh, no, you don't want to be like those people who can't work and they can't do things for themselves. So that's ingrained in you. Like, I find it really hard still to admit and to accept what I can and can't do. Like, even then me saying like, oh yeah, I just find it hard to shower. Like, that's a really hard thing to accept as a human. Like, I actually can't wash myself properly sometimes. Like, to admit that is really icky. It feels of like, oh no, I'm fine. I'm a fully functioning human and I'm great and I can do everything. And it's like, actually, I can't. And that's okay that I can't do that. And I think when you've, grown up in a world where it is so like hyper individualistic and capitalism is just everything basically, it's hard to accept that you can have support needs and rely on other people and find things difficult and also be like an equally valid human. So you can kind of see why people shy away, because it's like we all need the space to be able to work through that internalized ableism. But I think with the like highs and the lows, I find it very tricky to find that balance of honesty without almost feeling like people are entitled to knowing like that. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to share the hardest moments, but I kind of do to be able to like give context to the other stuff that I'm doing. So it's a work in progress. Definitely.
How much do you feel like you're on the horse and it's gonna go and you kind of gotta just stay on?
I think it's a really weird one, as I'm like, obviously the same time that my career and social media has gone like this, I'm also trying to navigate unmasking and like, who actually am I and what do I actually want from life and what am I actually capable of and what do I actually enjoy and who am I basically. And those two things are like kind of very opposing directions. Like everyone's like, just like make the most of it and do all these things and start a podcast and write more books and be on TV and do all of these things, like, and like, enjoy the kind of upwards progress of the career. But then I've got like my actual sort of feelings is like, I need to be doing so much less. I need to rest. Like I couldn't go, but I was invited to like a big music streaming platform had like an end of year party last week, and I couldn't go anyway because I already had plans. But I was like, oh, that's amazing! I can't believe you've invited me there. Like that's so cool. And then I was like, actually, it'd be so loud. I wouldn't know anyone there. I'd have to make small talk with strangers. There'd be flashing lights. I wouldn't know what, like there would be no rules. It's sort of like a party of like, well, what time am I supposed to actually arrive? Yep. Who am I supposed to talk to? When can I leave? How do I behave?
What do you wear?
Yeah, all of these things. Like in reality, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it very much, but you think that you should be doing it because it's a cool thing that people would love to be invited to and all of that stuff. You have to really stop and be like, do I want to do this thing? Or am I, especially as an ADHDer, it's dopamine. I'm like, oh yeah, sounds amazing. Like, that's great. And let's do it. And then I'm like, why am I doing that thing? I actually really don't want to do that. It's kind of a battle between like clinging on for dear life and being really grateful and making the most of it. And also like being really grateful for that opportunity to change perceptions and make a difference. It's not just about me getting to do the shiny things. It's about our community getting a voice and being listened to and being represented.
Do you feel a responsibility to do that?
I do. It's a very tricky one to navigate and balance, because it's like, I am very aware of the fact that I'm very high masking. I'm white. I've got pretty privilege. So it's like that kind of comes with a responsibility to like open the doorways. But it's also like, don't just have me here. Don't just listen to me. Also listen to all of these people over here as well. They've all got much more important things than I have to say. People of colour have been massively like let down by the system. Trans people, queer people, people with co-occurring disabilities, like all of these things, people with high support needs, non-verbal autistic people, like they need listening to as well, using that privilege of being high masking, palatable, white, all of these things, but also then finding ways to be able to raise other voices. So I think that was like, the book was a really nice place to be able to do that, to be able to include different people. I think as I hopefully organise my time better and have time to like get on mastering a bit more, I'd love that to be a platform that's not just my videos, it's all sorts of people's videos and posts and writing and stuff like that, to kind of represent more of the community. But it's a real tricky one. And I think as well with that, it's like I am aware of the fact that my success, or like whatever it is kind of dependent on my masking. Like if I was on stage and I was like, I don't know, really visibly stimming, I was like rocking backwards and forwards, I was talking in a really, or I wasn't able to speak, I was like, talking in a really blunt way, not sort of making eye contact at all, although very minimal anyway, but if I was more visibly unmasked, I wouldn't get listened to in the same way. I'm like, my whole thing is like unmasking, but I'm having to mask to get that message of unmasking across. But,
and you correct me if I'm wrong here, it's not just a simple costume change, right?
No.
It's not like I've got all my little masking tools here and I just put them all on, or I take them all off. We were talking about, I don't know, whether it's legs going nuts or, you with a stim toy. To me, they're all pieces of the puzzle of unmasking, because if you were totally masking, then I would be sat properly, not squirming around, not doing silly things with my feet or my eyes, and you wouldn't be fidgeting with your hands, and we'd both not have anything in our hands. So I give yourself a little break on that.
It's like baby steps.
Yeah, it is. And I'm saying that partly because that's what I guess I'm trying to do as well, to gradually go, well, I can be really blunt, and actually that can be okay. Like, people then know why I'm blunt and they become more used to it, and they allow me a bit more permission to be blunt because they know why it's happening. Or people that I work with now, I'm not going to the Christmas drinks, and it was acknowledged that I probably didn't want to go. And that, I think, it's so cool. It's like, Bella and Charlie, who work on the podcast, it's like, let's get a timer so that I'm not distracted by someone waving at me, and I'm not checking my watch, and I'm not worried and anxious about whether we're going over. All those little things, I guess, all help. But I hear your battle of masking, unmasking, social media, not social media, putting the word out and sort of flying the flag. for the neurodivergent community and for Unmasked, for your community, and needing to mask to do that.
It's that like authenticity, but like it's still a job at the end of the day. Like I don't have to show you what I'm like at home when I'm completely unmasked. But I think the knowledge of that existing is important for the people that follow me to, so I don't come across as one of those like, oh yeah, I'm disabled, but I'm not that disabled, or
I've
not like
figured
those
it all
people.
out.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing. Yeah.
Exactly, and I'm totally fine actually.
Yeah.
I think it's the acknowledgement, and as you say, it's the acknowledgement that it's not just about you, and it's about representation, across other conditions and all of the other minorities that are not being represented. Yeah, I think your struggle is real, Ellie, and I think the most important thing is that it's brilliant that you share that and acknowledge that there's this trade-off and there's compromises, because that's real, rather than, hey, you need to see me at my worst to understand that I am not perfect.
Yeah, I think it's like it's like the ADHD autism sort of.
Who's in charge?
Yeah, almost sort of like I've got a toddler inside of me as well. It's like I kind of know what's best. I know that I need to take a step back. I know that I need to rest. I know that I need to do all of these things. And then I've just
But correct, sorry to interrupt you, but correct me if I'm wrong. You know that now, but I'm guessing you didn't know that pre-diagnosis.
Oh, no, not at all. I just used to, my life was basically a cycle of run myself into the absolute ground, be unwell, recover, go again. And I think I'm still in that cycle, but at least I'm sort of conscious of it now, and I know that it's happening. And it's, I think, hopefully getting less like severe, like less low lows and less frequent as well. I guess the most kind of obvious now looking back example was like every school holidays. I can feel it now, my throat's going, because my body knows that it's like almost Christmas, but every single school holidays I would be unwell, like physically I'd like lose my voice, I'd be like ill, I'd be run down, because it was like the whole school term I'd be like going, like obviously school is not great for undiagnosed any neurodivergent person, and I'd be doing all these extra things. I'd be going to my dance classes and I'd be seeing my friends and doing all this stuff, and I'd be going. And then it's like I would finally stop and my body would just be like, what the heck has just happened for the last 6 weeks?
Crumble.
Yeah. And I think, I definitely was like unaware of that cycle that I was in. And I think, the obviously understanding is a massive part, and not like, and knowing why the crash comes. Because before I think it was just like, oh no, I'm like, my depression's back, my anxiety's back, I'm in a really bad place, like the world's going to end, not knowing like why do I feel so horrendous, and almost feeling guilt for feeling that bad as well, because I think that was a lot of it. Like when my mental health was at its worst, it was like sort of feeling a bit like ungrateful. Like I know that that's not how mental health works, that you have to have like air quotes a reason to be unhappy. But for me it was like, I'm doing well at school, I've never wanted for anything, I've got a family that love and support me, like why do I feel so awful all the time? Whereas now I'm like, oh, I'm just really tired. Like I've just done too much. I've just like worn myself out.
I feel like I have a choice that I can run myself into the ground and choose to do that. If I want to get loads done, be in London lots, do lots of talking, I know, and then have a period of rest after it. I kind of feel like empowered now that I have the freedom of choice to do that. Thankfully, in the simplest way I view my own brain is I've got an accelerator and a brake, and my ADHD is a foot on the floor accelerator, and being autistic is an absolute brake, because I want process and system and analysis and routine and structure and no risk and order, and then my ADHD is like, no, I want risk, chaos, pace, impatience, danger, give it to me all fast.
Now.
Yesterday, and again.
Yeah.
And I want it again and again and again. You said, which I loved, that you've learned to work with your brain, not against it.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really kind thing to say to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing that I've, especially with ADHD, I think it's just like, if you try and like fight, you're never going to win. So like, it's just not going to happen. So if you sort of like go with the like path of least resistance, like even things like, I don't know, one example I saw was like, if you always leave your clothes like on the chair in your bedroom or whatever, just put a basket on the chair. So it's like, at least they're not as messy on the chair, but they're in the basket. But don't tell yourself, I'm going to start putting them in the wardrobe, because you're not going to start. If you were going to put them in the wardrobe, you would have been doing it the whole time. They wouldn't be on the chair. So I think it is that of sort of like taking the fights that you want to take.
And I think that's really great for people to hear. If someone's listening and struggling, or maybe self-diagnosing, or just in that, tricky time, what advice would you give? What would you say?
I think if and where possible, like finding your people that's the thing that has got me through everything. Of like, I now have a place to belong, a friendship group to belong to. That's mostly online. It's mostly like a group chat. It's mostly texting my friends rather than being in physical spaces. But just knowing that I have people around me that get it, and that love me as I am, rather than for someone that I feel like I need to be in their presence, is like the best thing to come out of all of this. I'd never sort of had any sort of solid friendship groups. I had an awful time at school. I've never had that space of like, oh, these people love me for me. And I think finding that is the best thing to come of all of this. So yeah, if you can access spaces where other neurodivergent people are, whether that's online, whether that's locally, whether that's in person, finding people that get it, I think is the best thing. And like, I think it's so much like additional energy to always be explaining why you're feeling a certain way, whereas like you can just do it without having to explain, and that's okay. But yeah, I think that would be my thing of find your people.
Find your people, like that. What have you brought to put on the shelf?
I brought my book, which came out just over a month ago. But yeah, it's probably my proudest piece of work. I think this just kind of made everything feel a bit real. And I think like as someone that dropped out of school, has no qualifications, would never have thought that writing a book was something that I would do. So I think it's like a you did that
it's
moment.
A real thing.
Yeah. So brought a copy, and hopefully I'll have helpful tips in for anyone that
look
comes.
At it from a colour perspective, it's bang on.
It's perfect.
Ellie, thanks so much. Just thank you for everything that you're doing, because it's really important, and in the nice possible way, you really do have a responsibility to sort of fly the flag and keep flying it in a way that works for you. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.